This week's topic should not be a surprise to anyone. We're going to stir up Tasha's Cauldron of everything. Welcome to the Attic Dungeon. My name is Sam, and whether you want to be a tattoo artist or literally build any character ever, I'm here to help you with everything. Hey, you there. Yes, you. How would you like to subscribe to my channel? Hey, no, seriously, people. I am doing this all for fun, but I'm always really happy when I see some new subscribers to my channel. So if you like what I'm doing, subscribe. If you don't like what I'm doing, send my links to your worst enemies so that I may annoy them with all of my Dungeons and Dragons knowledge, and maybe they will subscribe, and thus my empire shall grow. Dear viewers, it is the most wonderful time of the year. It is the time where we have been graced with a new D&D core book. This time around, the core book is called Tasha's Guide to Everything, and it functions a lot like Xanatar's Guide to Everything. It adds new subclasses, new feats, new spells, and a bunch of other things for dungeon masters to build their campaigns with. It also includes some things from other books that aren't core books to make them Adventure League legal. Most important in this book will be the Artificer finally being dragged into the core books, along with a few other subclasses from books like Theros that will also appear in this one. Today, however, we are not going to focus on subclasses or wacky builds. Don't worry, dear viewers, those episodes will come soon enough. Today we're going to focus on all the new mechanics for race and class that Tasha's Cauldron has to offer. There is a lot to get through, dear viewers, so let's not waste any time. We are going to start in a very logical place, namely Chapter 1. Chapter 1 of this book is the chapter with all of the character customization options that we're going to talk about today, so this makes perfect sense. Now, even though this is a core book, ladies and gentlemen, technically speaking, everything in here are optional rules. The book also states this at the very beginning of the book, so ultimately it is up to the DM to decide whether or not all of this stuff, or some of the stuff, or none of the stuff is allowed in the campaign that you're currently playing. I can imagine that things like the extra subclasses and magic items and what have you will be relatively easy to squeeze into any campaign, but I can imagine that some of the other concepts are not going to sit well with some players. More conservative players specifically are going to twitch when they see some of the new character creation options that have been offered. So people talk about it. Dungeons and Dragons is still a game where you should be able to create your fantasy character, but it's also about creating a social contract at the table where everybody feels right and at ease. So talk about these rules before you implement them. Now, first off, and possibly one of the most important things I'm going to talk about today, they are giving you the option of customizing your chosen race in a few certain ways. First off, and I'm always going to be using dwarves as an example, you know why I like dwarves. They give you the option of handling the ability score increase given out by your race in the most flexible way possible. You can assign them any way you want. Let's have a look at our hill dwarf. As per usual, dwarves give +2 constitution and the hill dwarf brings +1 wisdom to the table. Now, you can change this into anything. You want to make your hill dwarf into an arcane trickster rogue? Okay, no problem. Put the +2 in dexterity and a +1 in intelligence, and there you go. You lose out on the constitution bonus though, so you have a squishier dwarf, but it is more roguish. There are literally no limits on how you implement these. If your race gives you a +2, +1 bonus, you can reconfigure these as you see fit. That of course also means that the mountain dwarf with its +2 bonus might seem more powerful to some people now because you can add +2 to your chosen ability scores. Now, because of the fact that the Mountain Dwarf has precious few other racial abilities, this balances out really easily, to be honest. Now, I've heard a fair bit of grumbling in the months preceding this release that taking away the standard ability modifiers of each race takes away the uniqueness of your race. And I must say, I cannot agree to that. Your race is defined by so much more than the number buffs it gets. Sure, most dwarves are very stocky and solid, but maybe you're playing that 1 week underfed dwarf that never became solid enough to have that sweet, delicious +2 constitution, and you want to replace it with something else. You learn to survive on your wits. So that +1 in intelligence makes sense to you, and the +2 in dexterity as well, because you just stole whatever you need, hence you have your dwarven rogue. The main reason why I like this though is because it will invite people to make class race combinations that were seen as suboptimal before, because they didn't get to start with a 16 in their main ability score, even though I've repeated numerous times that that is absolutely not necessary. But now your halfling barbarian kneecapper the terrible can start all beefed up and decked out with the ability scores that you wanted to have. It can start with that 16 in strength. And since we are playing a game where you're trying to create your fantasy characters, how can more customization options be a bad thing? If you don't want it, then don't do it. If you want your Mountain Dwarf to still have that +2/+2 in strength and constitution, go right ahead, go for it. Nobody's going to forbid you from sticking to the standard ability score increases. But if other people want to meddle around with them, let them be. They are not going to grow more powerful than your character. You're all still within the same range of maxing out at 20 in any given ability scores. Sure, some racial abilities synchronize really well with some class choices, but that goes for everyone. Every race has something for every class. Now you can just bring out the racial abilities together with the ability score increases. Now, to those who say that race and class choice to some extent is becoming one grey blob of blandness, and believe me, those people are out there, I see them every day, I say that a character is only as much of a grey blob as you chose to make it. Take this opportunity to make a wonderful origin story for your character, explaining why you're different from most of your other friends and family members that share a race with you. Now, the ability scores are not the only thing that you can customize. You can swap out languages to reflect where you were raised. Maybe your dwarf doesn't know Dwarvish because he was raised by elves of all things. He was found in the woods, raised by the elves, and hence he knows Common and Elvish. Technically speaking, you can swap out your common language as well, and you could be a Dwarvish Elvish elf-raised dwarf, which can be very entertaining, of course, but you're going to have trouble communicating with a lot of people in the world. You can also swap out skill, weapon and armor proficiencies for other things. Going back to our dwarf, dwarves always gain proficiencies with certain weapons like the warhammer, but as a fighter these proficiencies are super redundant because your class already gives you these proficiencies. According to the table that will now appear on screen, you could swap out one of your weapon proficiencies and instead gain a tool proficiency. Nothing game breaking at all, but now you can add some more versatility to your character and your racial features won't be redundant, which is always great. You might notice you can swap out a lot of things for a lot of other things, but you cannot train into armor proficiencies. So I believe there's 2 or 3 races that gain armor proficiencies as a racial trait. They cannot swap it into another armor proficiency. You can't trade in your medium armor proficiency for heavy armor proficiency, or other races can't give up a weapon proficiency to gain an armor proficiency. So don't be afraid, Dungeon Masters. Not every wizard is going to be some plate-mailed badass all of a sudden, but it could be that with the +2/+2 bonus that mountain dwarves offer and the medium armor training that they give, that you might see a lot of dwarf wizards all of a sudden. But even then, it's not going to break your game. If you want to break the game, people, you know you have to play a variant human. Those will always be the most broken race to pick, and the changes that Tasha's offers you is not going to change that. Your wizard in medium armor will still be vulnerable to other things and still has the hit die of a wet paper bag, so don't worry about it. Of course, there are also things that have not changed, because you might be going, wow, I can just basically Play-Doh my character into anything else. Not specifically. You cannot gain any features that are clearly related to the physique of your race, to the biological aspects. For example, your dwarf cannot retrain dark vision into anything else, nor can any non-dark vision race like a halfling gain dark vision in some way purely by race choice and swapping out some things. Same for something like halfling luck, now that I've touched upon halflings. If you're not playing a halfling, there will be no way for you to gain something like halfling luck as a racial feature. Those things are still very much glued to your race. Anything that addresses a physical feature or a something else just really glued to your race cannot be swapped out. So for those looking for the uniqueness in each race, to look for those things that really set them apart from other things, this is what you're looking for. All the physical racial traits, and I'm sure that almost every race, at least the most common races, have one of these. I'm thinking of Dragonborn's breath attacks, hill dwarves, hit point increase, halfling luck, gnomes, their magic resistance on wisdom, intelligence, and charisma. You know, those things, they are still tied to your character and they cannot change. There's even a template now for creating your own custom race, let's say, which is nice to have, and it's basically just the type of variant human. You get a +2 to 1 ability score that you choose. You get to pick up a feat and a few languages. It's nothing game breaking. It just adds more immersion rather, for those that are looking for it. And therein, once again, lies my advice for you, young wanderers. If you don't like these rules, don't use them, but give others the room to do so. They might be able to create that one character they've always been wanting to play, so allow them to do so if you can find it in your benevolent heart. If you want to do this, ask your DM if you can. At the very worst, your party is going to have mountain dwarf wizards with 16 intelligence. Really, there's nothing new there. Druids can do that already. They can start usually with 16 wisdom, and they also have medium armor and a shield, by the way. So really, don't be afraid that stuff like this is going to break the game. Of course, people who are a bit more into power gaming are going to have a few more options, sure, but they're intent on breaking the game anyway, then they will find a way to do so. This is not going to change that. Really view this as a way to heighten the immersion for your players, as a way for you as a player to really make your character reflect the things that you have in mind for them, things that happened in their backstory. You can now reflect by swapping out proficiencies or languages or even a few racial training feats and ability scores. The next bit in the book deals with retraining skills and subclasses. Both function in a very similar way. It might be that along the way your character has gotten interested into a new skill. Maybe he's had some practice. Maybe he's been sneaking around with a rogue a lot and has learned how to be quiet a lot better. But on the other side, he hasn't been training his athletic skill that often. You could ask the DM if you can train out of athletics into stealth, if those are both valid options for whatever class and background you're playing. Similarly, you can also change subclasses now. You can ask your DM to swap out of your current subclass into a new one. There are two very simple reasons for this. First, from a player perspective, maybe you don't quite like your subclass as much as you had hoped. Maybe it isn't offering what you thought it would offer and you would really like to try out something new. And I think there's nothing wrong with asking that because of that specific reason. The other reason could be, of course, that something has happened to your character that has caused them to gain a new interest in this other subclass, or it just kind of happens to them. Imagine a paladin, for example, a devotion paladin that has been in a party for quite a long time with the same people, and one of those characters dies to a very tragic thing that happened. Maybe a fight went wrong, they got betrayed by someone, but one of the characters dies. And this paladin is so furious at it that he swears an oath of vengeance to whatever being he might follow, and thus swaps out of his devotion oath into a vengeance oath. This can be a really powerful way of reflecting character evolution. After all these options of retraining, we get to new features for the base class of, well, for each base class. So we're not talking about new subclasses, we're talking about new features for each base class. A lot of these also have to do with retraining. For example, and I'm going to say that now so I don't have to repeat that every time I get to a class. Every spellcasting class receives the option, well, every main spellcasting class, so wizard, sorcerers, not paladins and rangers, you get it, receives the options of retraining cantrips at every ability score increase level, so 4, 8, 12, and so on. Every class that deals with fighting styles receives the option of retraining fighting styles at those same levels. So those are two things that you will find in the book at every either martial or spellcasting class, the option to retrain a relatively core thing of your class into something else. Other than that, you can find brand new features as well. Some classes have received some minor buffs here and there. Other classes have received a relatively big overhaul, actually. I'm looking at you, Ranger, but more on that later. Something else for the spellcasting classes. All of them, I believe, have also received an expanded spell list. And this might make sense to you since Tasha's Cauldron offers new spells for everyone. They have to go on the spell lists of the classes. But these new expanded spell lists also include spells that already existed. For example, a first level bard can now learn Color Spray, a very colorful and agreeably supporty bardic spell. And at higher levels, for example, they gain access to Enlarge, Reduce, and Mass Healing Word. There is nothing game-breaking in these expanded spell lists. The bards don't get access to Fireball. All of a sudden, they will still have to sacrifice a magical secret to get access to spells that are outside of their class concept. But the spells that have been added to the list fit the core fantasy of the class, alongside with any new spells that Tasha might grant them. It is really nice to see that Wizards of the Coast re-evaluated spell lists after all these years. The game has been out for a while now. I believe 5th edition got released in 2009, so after 11 years they have re-evaluated the spell list and made adjustments where it made sense according to them. Each class chapter starts with a selection of changes to the traditional class, so check those for the expanded spell lists as well. Now, the classes themselves then, let's start with the Artificer. Mechanical wise, I don't think anything has changed for the Artificer, and this makes sense. He's relatively new, he's only been around for a year and a half. So, as I've said before, the reason that something like the Artificer is here in this book is because Tasha's is a core book, and thus you can finally make an Adventure League legal Artificer. which is nice, I guess, for the 2% in the world that actually plays Adventure League. Of course, there is a new subclass for the Artificer, but as I said, not delving into those yet. To be fair, I already discussed some of the new subclasses when I did my Unearthed Arcana video a while ago, because I was kind of trying to predict which subclasses would make it into the next core book, and I am very glad to say my predictions were spot on. Moving on to Barbarians. Now they get some minor buffs to their overall kits. At level 3, they can gain an extra proficiency in any of the Barbarian skills, and at level 7, you're allowed to move half your speed at the same time that you start raging. None of this is game-breaking stuff, but I'm sure the Barbarian can appreciate an extra skill proficiency, seeing as a lot of their class features are usually very combat-oriented, and this gives them a little bit more of something to do outside of splitting skulls, which is something they are still very great at, of course. The extra bit of movement upon raging is just a nice bit of combat fluff to make the image of you raging and charging in even stronger. I don't really see why any dungeon master would block out these features. They add to the class without breaking it in any way. On to bards then. Maybe something a bit more significant here. You gain extra use for your bardic inspiration. A person who has been inspired by you and who casts a healing or a damage spell can roll the bardic inspiration die and add it to the damage or the healing of the spell. They can, however, only affect one target hit by the spell, so it's not like you're adding an extra d8 by then to the damage of all the fireball targets, but one guy who's getting hit by fireball could get hit harder. I assume this was put in because spellcasters who rely on spells with saving throws had no offensive use for bardic inspirations. Martial characters and spellcasters with attack roll spells could use the bardic die to increase their attack roll, which is a really good offensive way of making this die work. But healers and save throw casters had nothing offensive to do. Now they can add this die or these dice to their spells that they cast, cause a little bit more damage. It will scale somewhat nicely, of course, because your bardic dice do grow in power as you level, and I see this mainly as being a nice little power boost at early levels. But the use of inspiration dice is of course so very limited pre-level 5 because they only reset on a long rest at that point, and you will only have 3 or 4 up to level 5 of those dice, so this is not going to be anything game breaking. Basically it means that 3 times a day you could enhance a wizard's firebolt with an extra d6, and once you do get to level 5 and those inspiration dice reset on a short rest, by then, because of your subclass, you've already gained some extra feature to use your inspiration dice for. They are going to be doing far more crazier things than adding a d8 to some wizard's magic missiles. So a nice low level buff giving the inspiration dice an offensive use for spellcasters. Of course, I'm going to repeat it once or twice. They get the retraining feature like every other class does for their cantrips, but they also can reselect the expertise in one of their skills. They can replace expertise with another expertise. If you're not an expert in persuasion, but you are an expert in performance, you could take away the performance expertise and put it into persuasion every time you gain an ability scoring tree, so levels 4, 8, and so on. Add the expanded spell list, and those are all the changes for the bard. So a minor power buff to your inspiration die at low levels mainly. Clerics then, they have gained a few more things, a few interesting things as well. They have gained an ability to restore spell slots by using their channel divinity and spending a bonus action, obviously. Clerics had no way to restore spell slots during the day, so this can be a nice way to implement it. Sacrificing a channel divinity use is not something every cleric will easily do. I'm looking at you, Tempest Cleric. So this is relatively, I think it's balanced. It's an alternate use of a resource. You're sacrificing a channel divinity to gain a spell slot. There is a limit on the level of the spell slot that you can gain by doing this. Have a look at the book to know what. You could say that with excessive short resting, this could be abused a bit since channel divinity uses reset on short rests. But if the party is abusing short rest, there's other classes like the fighter and the warlock who are going to make a lot more out of those short rest than your cleric who can do extra channel divinities or a few spells. Now the clerics do gain a new feature that replaces one of their older features if you wish for it to happen, and that is the Blessed Strike feature. It replaces either potent spellcasting or divine strike. The great thing here is the flexibility it offers. What it does is once per round, when a creature takes damage from your cantrips or weapon attacks, you can add 1d8 of radiant damage to that attack roll. And I do believe it scales with level as well, just like Divine Strike does, or just like Potent Spellcasting scales with your ability score. The great thing here is, as I said, the flexibility it offers. The old features made your cleric better at either cantrips or at hitting stuff, thus steering you in a certain direction. This one allows you to choose every time whether you want that extra damage to go to your cantrips or to your weapon strikes. I think the one thing that I don't really like here is that it's always radiant damage. I wouldn't mind if the damage was linked to the domain the cleric is following or to the cantrip you're casting. Now Toll the Dead can do both radiant and necrotic damage, which is going to be very weird in some fights. I suppose radiant damage is good enough and it isn't resisted by a lot of things. And mainly I'm sure it makes the feature easier to remember if it only has one damage type. For weapon-based domains, this now means that you can use cantrips without losing out on potential damage. And for the more blasty clerics, it means that you could potentially roll more damage than your wisdom modifier would grant you. You have a 50% chance of doing equal or better than when you have a +5 modifier. And the lower your wisdom, the higher the chances that you do more damage. It's good, not godly. Druids are up next. Apart from the usual spellcasting swaps and lists, they gain an interesting use for their wild shape features. They can now summon a charge of wild shape to summon a familiar, just like the Find Familiar spell, but without having to pay any of the material costs. If you use a wild shape charge this way, the familiar counts as a fae instead of a beast, and it disappears after a number of hours that is equal to half your druid level. It's a cool feature that gives a different playstyle that will often achieve similar results. Instead of scouting yourself while you're shifted into a fly or a mouse or whatnot, you can now send something else to scout. Hence, this actually improves your safety, because when you're scouting as a mouse and somebody hits you, suddenly you turn back into a druid and you're in a room surrounded by your enemies. The familiar just kind of disappears. So it's safer for scouting, obviously for escaping certain situations. Wild shape is still going to be better, and this allows the druids to play the pet familiar fantasy as well that so many players seem to enjoy. Druids of the Moon obviously are not going to want to waste their shapes on this feature. They are going to need it to swap into their combat wild shapes. Fighters get no less than 5 new fighting styles to choose from. Some focus on utility, like blind fighting. Others focus on new styles of combat for the fighter, like unarmed combat. And finally, ladies and gentlemen, a fighting style for throwing weapons. Others give you new things to do during combat. There's one that allows you to intercept attacks aimed at allies. They're cool. I'm super happy, as I just said, that there is finally a thrown weapon fighting style. It really does solve some major issues that throwing builds had, because it allows you to draw the weapon and throw it in the same action, and it gives you a little nifty +2 damage bonus on the attack as well, just like dueling. By the way, something that I discovered rather quickly after reading these fighting styles is that the dueling fighting style and the throwing weapon fighting style stack. So if at some point you're able to gather these two fighting styles and you're holding, let's say, a hand axe and a shield, and you throw the hand axe, it will receive your usual modifier damage. Let's say at level 1, let's say level 4 is going to be like +4 or +3, and then you add +2 from throwing weapon fighting style and +2 from dueling fighting style. Throwing weapons have all of a sudden become a really damaging way of fighting, and I might have to do another throwing weapons build because of that, because the fighting style along with a few other things really changed the way these builds work. As I said, other classes can retrain cantrips, fighters can retrain their fighting style, but important to know, if you have combat maneuvers, whether it's from being a battle master or one of the new fighting styles which actually gives you a combat maneuver without becoming a battle master, you can retrain those as well at your ability score increased levels. Don't forget, fighters have more of those, so you have more chances to retrain as well. We move on to monks then. Monks are probably the class with the second most changes. I think clerics is third position, monks is 2, and the first position will be the ranger. They gain the ability to become proficient with a weapon of choice at level 2. It can be a heavy or a special weapon, and it will count as a monk weapon for the purposes of all of your interactions that you have. This opens up a lot of flavor, of course, because it allows non-Kensei monks to fight with weapons like light and hand crossbows, for example, which can be a lot of fun for brewing stuff as well. At level 3, they gain the option of doing an unarmed monk or a monk weapon attack rather, as a part of any action that involves them spending ki. This mainly smells like a nice buff for some monk subclasses, and especially the Way of the Elements, who can now use one of their elemental features to, cast a spell as they do, and then perform a regular attack as a bonus action on top of whatever spell they just cast. And since you can train into some form of crossbows or bows or what have you, you can actually attack from a range. I think they can cast Fireball at a certain point, the Element Monk, so you could cast Fireball and then still shoot a crossbow to kind of add damage to the already impressive Fireball damage, of course. It's also free of charge. It takes up your bonus action just like your regular unarmed attack does, but it's free of charge. You don't need to spend any extra ki, and the thing is that your normal unarmed attack that you can perform as a bonus action, you can only perform when you've done the attack action. This one can be done as a extra bonus, well, not an extra bonus action, but as an additional attack as a bonus action if your main action involved you spending ki. It is not going to transform 4 element monks into all-powerful creatures, but it does give the class some extra oomph, and we all know 4 elements is lacking that, as you know. So this feature, along with some of the other features, can really enhance some of these subpar monk subclasses while having little to no effect on the classes that don't need the buffs. We're not done yet. Monks gain more things. At level 4, they can spend 2 ki points to roll the martial arts die and heal for that amount, plus your proficiency modifier. And last but not least, at level 5, they gain the ability to spend 1, 2, or 3 ki points when they miss with an attack, and each point spent will increase the attack roll by 2, possibly turning a miss into a hit. I don't think monks needed a way to gain extra accuracy, but it really never hurts to have the option, right? Especially not at higher levels where you have more and more key points to spend. This can be a really good way to make that crucial attack land. Paladins are up next, and they take a page from the cleric's book. Literally, they gain 3 new fighting styles. They share some with the fighter, but one of them allows them to learn 2 cleric cantrips. So your paladin can now pick up guidance or Toll the Dead or what's the thing, Sacred Flame. And just like clerics, they can spend their channel divinity uses to regain spell slots. Again, limitations apply. Check the book. I suppose this is to encourage some more actual spell casting, but I think most people are just going to smite more and more. Just like fighters, by the way, they can also retrain their fighting styles at every ability score increase level. Then, we come to the big one, the Ranger. Obviously, they gain new fighting styles, also one where they can pick up druid cantrips, but more importantly, a lot of the base Ranger features now have an alternate version. For example, Deft Explorer replaces the Natural Explorer feature, and it gives you new class traits at every so many levels. It gives you better skills, more walking speed, and some nice way to give yourself some temporary hit points later on. Favored foe can be replaced with favored enemy, which gives you some form of alternate mini hunter's mark feature that is not bound to a type of enemy. You just mark an enemy on the field that you would like to see dead. You can swap out Primal Awareness for Primeval Awareness. You see that a lot of the names are really close. They really want to keep the Ranger fantasy going here, but it's a bit confusing at first. Anyway, Primeval Awareness gives you a larger list of spells known by adding some very specific Ranger utility spells to your spells known list. This is all before 4th level, by the way, where the Ranger, of course, can retrain fighting styles. But at 10th level, you gain a way to make yourself invisible for a full turn without any spell casting involved. I condensed this a bit, but they really reworked the base Ranger features here. A lot of the gimmicky situational stuff like favored enemy and favored terrain can be removed from the class in favor of a Ranger who functions equally well against any foe in any terrain. Really worth having a look at and checking whether the Dungeon Master is okay with this version of the base Ranger. And it doesn't stop there, ladies and gentlemen. Beastmaster Rangers might be very happy to know that new options have opened up for them. 3 types of Beast Companions, though I can't exactly remember the names. They're very generic, like one is called Beast of the Land, one is called Beast of the Water, and I'm guessing the other one is going to be the Beast of the Air. Have been included. They have specific features, they scale with your proficiency modifier, and they allow you to move away from those very low combat rating beasts that you could pick as a Beastmaster Ranger. The way they interact with your actions is still the same. You have to sacrifice an attack to have them do an attack, and you can use bonus actions, I think, to control them as well. But they do offer a more powerful version because, as most people know, the Beastmaster kind of got outdated as you went on in levels, and hopefully these new companion options fix that option. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is a very condensed version of all the new things that the Ranger gets. Really, it is a lot that they get. Have a read, talk to your table about it if you want to play a Ranger. Sticking in the R, we of course move on to Rogues. Thankfully they only gain one thing. They don't even gain any retraining options. They don't need those. Rogues are awesome. Actually, it's weird that they don't get a retraining for expertise. Maybe it's because bards are more jack of all trades and hence can swap the expertises around. But what they do gain is, starting from level 3, if you don't move during your entire turn, you can get advantage on any attacks you take during that turn. This counts as a bonus action, so I would say that this is there to even the field between range rogues and melee rogues. Up to now, melee rogues had a clear advantage to lure out sneak attack because they were able to attack twice, and being able to have advantage on the one attack that a rogue with a short bow might have is going to be really strong, because not only do you have an increased chance of hitting, but if you hit, you automatically get sneak attack because you were attacking with advantage. Now this can be great for any type of rogue. If your dual wielding rogue is attacking an enemy that is not flanked by any ally, or there's no other way for you to get sneak attack at that point, it will be well worth sacrificing your second attack to make sure that you can apply your sneak attack that turn. That is always going to do more damage than the 1d6 offhand that you're wielding. Apart from making range rogues a thing, this could obviously also encourage rogues to wield one melee weapon, like a rapier. A rapier wielding rogue is now a thing, which makes it a bit easier maybe for arcane trickster rogues to have a free hand for spellcasting, or for multi-classing and picking up maybe the dueling fighting style. There's other ways for picking up fighting styles as well, by the way, now. But anyway, it opens up a hand and it opens up opportunities for the rogue to branch out into other things. We're almost there, ladies and gentlemen. This is a long one, as I told you. Sorcerers gain some new meta magics. They get one to reroll attack rolls and one to change the damage types of spells that you've cast. Both can be really good. Fireball, more like lightning ball. Hey, it saves you from having to pick up a feat to overcome resistances. But it does take up one of your meta magic slots. But it also makes you very versatile as a damage dealer, though, because you don't need to pick up multiple spells to deal different types of damage. And as you're a sorcerer with a very limited pool of spells, that is actually really important to you. By the way, the meta magic that allows you to re-roll an attack roll can be used on top of any other meta magic. So if you go like, oh, I want to cast a twin spell, let's take something very basic, I want to cast twin firebolt, and one of them misses, you can still invoke this new re-roll meta magic and reroll that firebolt attack roll. They also get to retrain meta magic at the same level where you can retrain cantrips and what have you. You also get to retrain your meta magics, and at level 5 they can also spend a sorcery point to reroll an ability check, so that's nice. They really get more options of using sorcery points to influence their dice rolls, and I really like that as a concept. If you remember, my very first video was the Lucky Bastard build, which was all about manipulating dice, so I'm a big fan of stuff like that. 2 more. Warlocks get a new pact boon. They can now ask their patron for a talisman, which you or an ally can wear, and it kind of functions as a guidance on ability rolls with limited uses at its base form. But obviously there are also going to be new invocations that enhance this talisman. For example, there's one that allows you, if you're handing out a talisman to someone else, that allows that person to teleport to you or you to teleport to them, which can be really handy as well. Apart from cantrips, of course, warlocks can also retrain their mystic arcanum spells, which is really good for the high-level warlocks that have made a choice that they maybe don't like when it comes to your high-level spells. You can retrain those as well. And you can even swap out your pact boon. You can swap from having a pact weapon to having a Pact of the Chain familiar, for example. Replacing, of course, any relevant invocations at the same moment. If you have a bunch of invocations linked to that Pact of the Blade, you have to swap those out for other invocations, possibly, but not necessarily linked to your Pact of the Chain. As I said, they get new invocations. Some are for the new talisman, others are for the Pact of Tome and Chain. None of them are for Pact of the Blade. I think they want to make the other options more attractive again. A lot of people pick the Pact weapon because it's pretty good. It adds some versatility to your warlock, and with the inclusion of Hexblade warlocks in Senator Guides of to Everything, rather, those Pact weapons have been everywhere. So the new invocations are here to encourage some diversity in your Pact Boon choices. Wizards then gain one cool feature. They can now prepare cantrips in the same way that they prepare spells. All of the wizard cantrips are going to be in your spellbook, and after a long rest you can swap them out as needed, just as you swap out your prepared spells. Talk about versatility. This really makes the wizard into the Swiss army knives of spellcasting, even when it comes to cantrips, and even at the lowest of levels, where basically after every long rest you can pick the cantrips that you think you will need. And that is it, ladies and gentlemen. All the changes to race and base class features that you should know about right now. It is a lot to take in. Maybe it has persuaded you to buy Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. I loved reading the book, and I'm looking forward to brewing characters with all these new features. Please don't hesitate to leave anything that I should know in the comments down below. Maybe your opinion about all of these additional features that you can now include in your character creation process. Stay safe, and then we will see each other again next time in the Attic Dungeon.